Otto, it's lovely to meet you and to speak with you today. Good morning, I gather, because you're in Vancouver and I'm at home here in Birmingham.
Good afternoon, and yes, good morning for me. It's a beautiful, the sun is just coming up, and we're expecting some snow. So I'm looking forward to this week here in Vancouver.
Lovely. Um, I always go back to the very beginning, and I'm going to mention the word violin and also straight away say that, we have something vaguely in common. I once did play in a masterclass given by the violin teacher Victor Lieberman, who I read
Ooh.
that you were taught by as along with others. So, do you come from a musical family, and was the violin your first love?
So the violin was definitely my first love. So it all happened when I found a violin at my grandmother's place in the attic. It was full of dust and it was hidden away somewhere. I got it out and I started playing, and I really liked it. And I just didn't stop anymore playing the violin. The so my parents loved music, but not I'm not from a musician's family or anything.
Yeah,
If you go back a bit further in history, my family comes from Vienna and around Vienna,
yeah.
and they were musicians and sculptors, and there's lots of arts in the family coming from Austria and that area. But my parents did completely different things, so I was always doing that on my own, and it's actually I felt very comfortable with that.
Mm. Um, I was going to ask or mention that you mentioned Vienna, but you weren't born there. You're Dutch, is that correct?
I'm Dutch. I'm
Yes.
I'm Dutch. I'm born in the Netherlands, and it's funny you mentioned Victor Lieberman being my violin teacher, because somehow there's always been lots of, and we'll come to speak about that probably later on, but lots of Russian influences in
Huh.
my musical life, to
Yes.
say, and of course that was studying with him was a big part of well getting that way of playing and that kind of spirit right into my veins and everything. Yeah.
Did you? Because I'm not sure I know the answer to this, but did you play in youth orchestras in the Netherlands?
Well,
I'm sure there's a national youth orchestra, but I wonder whether there's local and smaller groups.
Well, actually, I didn't, and a little bit to my regret, because my teacher at the time, when I was young, always thought that playing in an orchestra, you can do that for the rest of your life if you want to, and if
Yeah,
you do it too soon, it might muck up your technique.
yeah.
Which I at the time I thought, yeah, that makes sense, but thinking back, there are so many colleagues and friends that have the most wonderful memories of playing in youth orchestras and actually traveling with the youth orchestras, and
Absolutely.
I always feel slightly jealous having missed out on that. Yeah.
Yeah, touring as a child. I mean, I think I first went on tour when I was 13, and then probably
Wow.
went every 1 or 2 years until
Wow.
and until now. But
Fantastic.
especially
Yeah.
as kids, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
what a great
Yeah.
experience. And
Yeah.
you're still friends with those people, later on in life, people you went on tour with for a week or whatever. Um,
Exactly.
so on to further and higher education. I'm assuming you went as a violinist, or did you go and study something else?
No, I went as a violinist.
Hmm.
Absolutely. I did a little bit of psychology studies on the side,
Yeah.
but that was just purely because I thought it was interesting, and I wanted to, well, do something else as well. But music kept on pulling harder than studying for something else. So I studied the violin, as we talked about, with Victor Lieberman in a place called Utrecht. Utrecht is in the Netherlands. It's one of the big cities. It's a beautiful city. It's a city where I was actually born.
Yeah.
So I was back in the city where I was born, and at that time, Utrecht was a really good music school because it had a couple of very interesting and famous teachers, and two of them were for violin. One of them was Lieberman, and the other one was Philip Hirschhorn, who is, well, unfortunately he's no longer with us, but he was an extraordinary figure, who was very famous for his finale of the Queen Elizabeth competition, where he plays the Paganini concerto.
Hmm.
He got first prize when Gidon Kramer got third prize, and
Wow.
it was a very special man, and I remember very well from this recording. I listened and listened forever to that recording, and at the time, I don't know how it's now, but at the time it was actually not allowed to applaud, especially not between movements. And then after the first movement, there was like 12 minutes of applause when he finished that. It's still, when you listen to it, I'm thinking about it, I get goosebumps. So Lieberman and Hirschhorn, those great teachers were there in Utrecht, which attracted a lot of international great players, which was rather unique, I think. And I lived in a student house with people from Spain and from Italy and from Korea, and people came from everywhere to join those classes in Utrecht. And I do remember, because I don't play the violin anymore. Since I started conducting, I just quit the violin completely. But I do remember those evenings, playing string quartets with lots of pasta and red wine, and that's a kind of joy. As a musician, you can share that with other musicians. As a conductor, it's much more by yourself. And somehow, although I never miss having to practice and be in shape for playing the violin, which you do. Otherwise, it's really terrible. But that kind of physical thing, what you do when you play an instrument and then you do it together with a small group and you're just having fun with music, that I have such great memories of that, actually.
I was laughing because it's almost identical to me. And in fact, I noticed we're born in the same year. But, I was a violinist for 22 years with the City of Birmingham Symphony Orchestra, but stopped playing in July 2014. There's one just over there, but I barely ever pick it up. And I don't miss the practicing, but I do miss the camaraderie of the small groups
Yes.
And when I noticed it the most was actually at the start of lockdown, when I saw that people were doing concerts from their living room or whatever else. And that's why I started this podcast, because I thought, well, what can we do as conductors? We can do nothing. We've got nobody to play with.
Wonderful. Yeah. Well, it's wonderful that you do this because having this little personal insight in all those fantastic conductors you have on your podcast is a revelation for many people. I think it's really great. And it also somehow connects us in a way that is, of course, we're not speaking to each other. The only time you meet conductors is at the airport trying to catch another flight.
That's right.
But and that's so you hardly ever get the chance to talk about conducting with other conductors.
No, it's very true. And actually, I've made quite a few firm friends. For instance, Kevin John Edusei is conducting in Birmingham this week, and I should probably look him up and go and see him, having interviewed him.
Fantastic.
We have gone on to conducting, and I'm assuming that it was whilst you were studying the violin in Utrecht that conducting rears its ugly head, or whatever you want to call it.
Very true. Well, that's very true. So it was actually, it was perhaps because my teacher Lieberman thought I wasn't a great violinist, and then he said, well, why don't you also think about conducting? And I said, well, what do you mean? Why should I think about conducting? And then he said, well, I can see something in your, I can't remember the exact words. He might have said something like your nature or the way you treat music. That might be something for you. And then I thought, I'll finish my violin first and I'll see whatever happens. And it somehow stuck in the back of my mind somewhere. It was there. And then I was playing St. Matthew Passion, and the conductor, it's a classic story. The conductor wasn't there. So who wants to do the rehearsal? And I said, I'll try it. Yeah. And then I thought, this is great fun. I'm gonna research this a bit more. So I actually went to Lithuania, to Vilnius, and I studied there with a guy who was at the time the music director of the opera in Vilnius. He's called Jonas Alexa, and he was just a very brilliant and wonderful conductor and a really good teacher. And somehow people don't really know him as a conductor because he had two big problems. Because when he was young, Lithuania was very much under control of another big country, and that other big country didn't allow the talented musicians to go abroad. So he told me that once he met von Karajan, and Karajan said, well, you should come to Berlin. You should be my assistant in Berlin because you're such a wonderful musician and conductor. And then he was told he wasn't allowed. So that already in the beginning of his career, it was like, no, you're not going elsewhere. You're staying in Lithuania. You're one of us. And then he also developed a kind of kind of fear of flying somehow. He didn't want to go on airplanes. So then those two elements kind of, well, made his career stay in Lithuania. But it was a fabulous conductor, and a very tough teacher. I remember wanting me to do things from memory, and that was not something I was used to be doing. And there's still moments where I think I'm glad that he put me through that, because well, yeah, it's just, you have to, sometimes you need someone else to kind of push you in a certain direction that you might not have done yourself. And it was a wonderful time. And one of the great things in Vilnius when I was studying there was an orchestra in a place called Kaunas, which is it's maybe the second city of Lithuania. And I always compare it to Amsterdam and Rotterdam. I don't know if you know Amsterdam and Rotterdam. Amsterdam is a beautiful city, but also slightly touristic. And
Yes,
Rotterdam,
yes.
Rotterdam is very different. Rotterdam is very much the hardworking people. And Rotterdam was bombed during the Second World War, and the city doesn't have that elegance and beauty as Amsterdam, but the people in Rotterdam are hardworking, great people, and are very, in a way, also very concerned about each other and about the city they live in. And Vilnius and Kaunas is perhaps a bit the same. Vilnius is the city everyone knows and goes to when they go visit Lithuania as a tourist. But Kaunas is a city that where I felt, oh, here's where the real Lithuanian people are working and living. So there was an orchestra, a small chamber orchestra, and the conductor was out or off. I'm not sure what was going on with that conductor. So they needed someone to do all their rehearsing. And so when studying in Vilnius, I would, a couple of times a week, I would take the bus into the other city, Kaunas, and I learned a great deal from just standing in front of the orchestra and making all the mistakes I still make, but now I know why I do them. Yeah.
Was Alexa, I mean, you said he was a hard taskmaster. Was he an overall holistic approach equally weighed on score study and stick technique, or was he hot on one area more than the other?
It was, he always wanted the students to be extremely clear, and very precise in like rhythmical things in your technique should be always clear and very much in control. But at the same time, it was someone, when you saw him conduct, he was improvising almost every bar what he was doing. So there was this huge knowledge and technical skill that he had, and he wanted his students to work on. But when he was conducting himself, it was like magical, the way he kind of forgot all about the technique and was just there for the music, which I think he taught me, and I'll never accomplish what he could do, but he taught me that if you don't have those skills first in your technique, there's no way you can ever be free in a musical way, and still be helpful for an orchestra. And what he showed me was that the other way around, it just doesn't work. You cannot just make music without actually knowing what you're doing. And so that was great. And he was an opera conductor. And I think, especially being an opera conductor, you have to be extremely flexible because things happen all the time. But at the same time, you have to be so clear about what's going on that the orchestra can follow you. Even with their ears closed, they know if the singer is making a rubato or not. So I think that's where a lot of that skill also comes from.
I'm going to guess what happened next, because I think you said you went to Vilnius first, but then I think you come back home, and then you studied with Jurjen Hempel and Kenneth Montgomery. And I know Kenneth Montgomery has taught, or maybe still does, in The Hague. Is that right?
It's right.
Yeah. So it was a wild guess, but it sounds like I've got it right. And so
well,
how did that?
You've got it almost right. So I started with Jurjen and Ken, and then and during that time I did go to Vilnius back and forth. So it was kind of a mixture, and it was interesting because Kenneth Montgomery is also one of the great opera conductors, and was musically extremely interesting for me to get to know. Absolutely no technique whatsoever was talked about during the lessons. So it's so it was a very different approach, but also a fantastic one.
Yeah. And Jurjen, how does he teach? Because he's a name I know, because I went and conducted in Joensuu in Finland, which he was the music boss of for quite a while. So it's a name I know, and I think we shared an agent for a while. But what's his teaching style like?
So Jurjen is much more down to earth, and Jurjen is a very technical conductor, and is capable of doing the most complicated Fernie scores, and has no issue with studying a score for a year before actually understanding what the 13 against 17 rhythms are doing, and he can do that. He has this kind of brilliant, almost Boulez way of thinking and being able to show stuff. So that was a wonderful combination, having Jurjen and Kenneth both as inspirational conductors. Yeah. And Jurjen was, like me, the assistant of the Rotterdam Philharmonic Orchestra for many years. So I after my studies, that's the place where I went. So there's also the connection with Jurjen there.
Well, it's almost like you've read my mind. I was going to drop in that during the time that you were the principal conductor of Ensemble MAE for 6 years, you were also assistant conductor to the Rotterdam Phil. And you mentioned it earlier, another Russian name appears here, and that's Valery Gergiev, who was the music director at the time.
Yes.
How was that those 3 years when you've got the chance to ask musicians things in the TQ, and to hear them talk about the guest conductors you may or may not get to see, and also to be working with a name such as Gergiev? How was that?
Well, it was a brilliant time. So when I started there, it felt like getting the keys to a Ferrari when you've just managed to pass your driver's license, right? So it's like the orchestra in Rotterdam is really like a Ferrari. If you press the right buttons, they go really fast, and they go really good. But they can also go too fast and too good, So this is and standing in front of that orchestra, I always felt I think that's really important for me to mention, is that I always felt very welcome, because it's such a difficult thing for a young conductor to stand in front of the orchestra and actually doing all those things for the very first time. And they've been playing it for their entire life, so they actually know much better what can go wrong or right. And you're doing it, and you're diving into this deep water, and the water is sometimes really cold, and you have to kind of survive. But they were brilliant. They were fantastic. And the very first week I did there as assistant conductor, as you say, for Valery Gergiev, I was assistant conductor for all the guest conductors. So I had to study a new program for every week. So I got a lot of repertoire. But of course, the weeks with Gergiev were the most exciting ones. First of all, he was the music director. But secondly, he is, or we should say was, perhaps the busiest conductor in the world.
Absolutely,
So my biggest luck was that he never rehearsed the orchestra, and I did all his rehearsals. In my very first week, we were doing a Prokofiev festival, which meant all the orchestral works by Prokofiev. So that's all his symphonies, all the ballets, but also the more unknown Prokofiev, works like Le Chou and works like The Gambler, and they're like these. Nobody knows these things, and they're great music. It's fantastic music, but I had no idea. So I was like, I had one summer to prepare like everything by Prokofiev, and then every day in rehearsing the orchestra was a new symphony and a new ballet. It was like crazy. So it was very compressed. And then, of course, when Gergiev comes along and he works for 3 minutes with the orchestra, everything sounds different. So that's he is he's like, I've compared him more often with, and I mean that in a very positive way, as a dog in a garden, and it's a garden that the dog doesn't know, but he goes immediately to the place where the bone is hidden. He knows where to find. He knows. I remember sitting in a concert, and then suddenly he turns to the tuba, and the tuba plays this incredible melody that I had no idea was in the score, hidden somewhere, and then he brings out something like that. Of course, not rehearsing the orchestra can be very scary for an orchestra as well. I mean, if you do the right spring with 10 minutes rehearsal time, or if you do Mahler, das Lied von der Erde, and the singers have never had a rehearsal with the conductor, it's a very scary thing. So I was always trying to make the orchestra feel that whatever happens, they know what to do to stay together. And so I had the task to be very practical in rehearsals, but also in preparing for whatever happens, right? So it was a fantastic time, and being able to watch him when he was rehearsing, like brilliantly rehearsing, like fantastic, like things just really changed when he was working on stuff. So it was a brilliant time, marvelous time. Yeah.
Well, I've spoken to another conductor on this podcast who benefited from Gergiev's either lack of rehearsal or inability sometimes to actually make the connections to get to the concert.
Exactly.
Michael Francis, who was a double bass player in the London Symphony Orchestra. And I've also benefited. The Swedish Radio Symphony Orchestra were part of the Baltic Festival a few years ago, and Gergiev was just going to turn up on the day and conduct Shostakovich's second piano concerto and Shostakovich's Symphony No. 4. Now, if you know Shostakovich 4, you know that it needs more than just somebody to turn up on the day.
Absolutely.
So they asked me to go, and I did 2 days rehearsal with them.
Right.
And so, the likes of you and I do benefit from this madcap schedule that, as you rightly say, he used to do.
Yeah.
But I do wonder, and let's stay on there first of all. I agree with you so much. My job those 2 days in with the Swedish Radio was just to make sure that they knew exactly what was going on in every bar, so that he could do his flights of fancy or whatever he wanted to do, and they knew how to stick together. Yes. I totally agree. What an incredible way for you to learn so much repertoire and then see him come in. I wonder whether I could ask, and I wonder whether you know the answer or are willing to give the answer. Because I've never asked anybody from the LSO or from any of the other orchestras that, Gergiev's been music director of, what do the players think about the fact that somebody else does all of their rehearsal? Because I know in my old orchestra, I don't think we would have put up with it for very long.
I know. I mean, I completely agree with everything you say, and it reminds me of the words that Gergiev actually said to me once. He said, "Listen, you're not my assistant. I'm your assistant because I'm not here. You get to do all that great work. So I'm assisting you." And it's very true. And it's as an orchestra, it's in sometimes it's incredibly frustrating not to be able to work with him or with the person doing the concerts. On the other hand, some concerts were so brilliant and so unique. And I think lots of the musicians also appreciated the fact that they were, that was possible at all to work with him.
Yes.
And working with an assistant, I mean, I think as long as the assistant knows the orchestra well and knows when to rehearse and also knows when to back out, and just making sure that the orchestra, as you say, know what's going on and feel comfortable with everything. But there needs to be a balance. If the balance is gone, then it's impossible for everyone. Because that the balance just makes sure that the spirit of the orchestra is positive, which is so important. And it's very funny thinking about the spirit of an orchestra. And I'm sure you know this program maestro. I think it started on the BBC.
It started on the BBC, and it's now very popular in the Netherlands. And actually, I recently interviewed Dominic Seldis for my Patreon page, and he talks about it. That episode's coming out this month, dear listener.
Brilliant. Part one. And I'm thinking about that program, because what we're talking about actually is, and I did some of those maestro shows, and and I was so surprised by finding out that what if the orchestra likes the personality of the conductor, if the conductor is totally incapable of beating a bar right, but giving a musical sense and a musical spirit and a musical timing, the orchestra actually can play pretty well. This is something that I really learned during those programs, the shows, that there's lots of conducting is actually has to do with the like if the orchestra is willing and wanting to play well, they can play gorgeous, and the conductor can very often do whatever he likes. And that's why I'm thinking also about that time in Rotterdam. I think because the spirit in the orchestra was so positive and so good, and everyone wanted to be prepared for the moment that someone like Gergiev comes along. On the other hand, I did experience when Gergiev left and Yannick came to the orchestra to be the music director. He started to work with them in a very detailed and a very thorough way, and the orchestra really flourished and went on to be maybe even a more a better orchestra. It's not to say that some concerts with Gergiev were incomparable with anything. I still believe he is the most talented conductor ever. But taking care of an orchestra is also working very regularly on very specific, detailed things. And I did feel that when Yannick came in, it was very good for the orchestra. It was the change was very good. Yeah.
One final question, because I know I didn't ask Michael this, and you were in exactly the position for me to maybe get an answer. When I did Shostakovich 4 with the Swedish radio, I had no contact with Gergiev at all. And so what I did was I downloaded his recording with the Mariinsky Theatre, and I found 2 performances online on YouTube with other orchestras. And so I could say to the orchestra, look, I think he's likely to do this tempo. He could do this completely different from the score thing here, because he's done that before, but he could also do this. I did the same with a Schumann overture for Simon Rattle when the CBSO did something recently, and I did all these rehearsals. And in every performance he'd done, he did this slowing up for a specific note. And when I was there when he ran it through, and he did the slowing up, and then the orchestra did it immediately, and he just shouted out, "Thanks, Mike," because I'd done my homework. Did he contact you beforehand and say, look, my basic tempos are this, I do this, that there, this here, or did you just try and come up with basically what's printed and give a sort of neutral?
Well, I did pretty much the same thing. I was always listening to his recordings and performances before I went with a certain piece to the orchestra. Always mentioning that probably it would go very, very, very different. And on many occasions, I picked him up from the place where he was actually conducting the week before to make sure that he was on time for his next week. I remember we were sitting in the taxi from the airport to Rotterdam, and we were doing, I think we were doing pictures, or was it a Mahler symphony? It was, or pictures of a Mahler symphony. And he asks me, do I do that from memory?
That's a weird question.
I always said, well, I don't think so. So it's like, I mean, that's just, This is a very spontaneous way of music making, isn't it?
Yeah,
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 yeah.
absolutely.
And that's also what makes it so exciting. There's this new way of looking at the score every time he does something.
Yeah.
And it can turn out extremely well, or it can also go the other way.
Yeah. After leaving Rotterdam, chief conductor in two places, for 5 years with the Holland Sinfonia, and then for
Yes.
6 years with the Symphony Orchestra St. Gallen and the Opera of St. Gallen.
Yes.
Isn't it wonderful for an orchestra to be able to do both the symphonic and the opera?
Brilliant.
Because when they come to accompany a piano concerto or a violinist or something,
oh yeah,
I mean, other orchestras I know do both roles. And as a consequence of being involved with St. Gallen Opera, I think you've pretty much done an opera every year since, looking at your calendar. How many would you like to do in an ideal year? I mean, now we're sort of back. Just one, yeah.
One, because I mean, I love doing opera, and it's for all the reasons you mentioned. It's also one of the things I love about doing opera is that you spend a lot of time with the score and a lot of time with the singers and the regisseur and the people in a production. Which makes it so more in depth and more meaningful, as when you conduct an orchestra. Even when you conduct your own orchestra, like where you are a music director, you spend 3 days on a program. You give 2 or 3 concerts, and then you go on to the next. It's a very different way of how you're spending your time. But opera takes so much time. So I have a family. I have my wife and kids that I want to see, and being away for 6, 7, or 8 weeks I find that really tough, being away from the family for so long. I always try to go home after 2 or 3 weeks on the road, because I think in the end the family is the most important thing for me. And music is great, and I love what I do, and I'm very eager to do all the repertoire that comes my way, and meet all the orchestras that are willing to have me stand in front of them. But in the end, I mean, missing out on the things that my kids are growing up doing and learning, and I in the end that is the most important thing. So doing one opera in the season does feel like a good balancing out, and I completely agree with what you say about orchestras doing both, giving symphony concerts and playing in the opera house. The wonderful thing in St. Gallen was we had 2 halls. One side of the road was the concert hall, the Tonhalle, and the other side was the theater. So they could just cross the road and play a Don Giovanni performance in the evening, and the next morning rehearse a Beethoven symphony. And for me, that was it was fantastic to find that the orchestra could be so flexible and so. I mean, what you have to do as an opera orchestra, listening and being, being ready to go in any direction all the time, just gives freedom when you play a symphonic program. So it's I had great fun. I just love doing it. Yeah.
The next place, I mean, you tend to do, Holland Sinfonia was 7 till 12, St. Gallen was 12 till 2018, and then from 2018 onwards, you've been music director of Vancouver Symphony Orchestra. So you tend to go from one to the other, with occasional, 2 things going at once. How have you found Vancouver? I know when I spoke to the late, great, and dearly lamented Bramwell Tovey, that he loved working in Vancouver. How are you finding it?
Vancouver is brilliant. So first of all, the orchestra is just fantastic. It's a lovely bunch of people, and they're a unique group. They're really very eager to learn and to work and to improve and to grow as an orchestra. Bramwell, as you say, was here for a long time, for 18 years.
Yes.
So he must have done something really well. And I have huge respect for that. And he's left an orchestra that's just really good and really wonderful to be with. And it's every time I come to Vancouver, I'm surprised how many new things we discover ourselves, amongst ourselves, in the orchestra, in me. We're really growing together. It's a great city to be in. I'm a huge outdoors fan. So Vancouver is in between the mountains and the ocean.
Yes.
So you could actually go skiing, golfing, and swimming in one day without having to travel more than 15 minutes. And it's especially the swimming that is very dear to my heart. I swim every day. I swim every morning in the swimming pool, and I try to swim all year round with a wetsuit in lakes or in the ocean or somewhere. And so I find that that proximity of nature is makes me very happy. And there's something about water and my work which I haven't really figured out how that works. But there are a couple of orchestras that I go to that are by the ocean, and I always have great weeks with those orchestras. I don't know why that is, but it's being close to the water, to the ocean, just gives me a state of mind that is very, I don't know, it opens up something in my whatever, in my spirit, or my the way I behave myself, and it just opens up paths to music somehow, which is fascinating. And I haven't really figured out what that is, but it's apart from the fact that it's really inspiring. For instance, when we talk about swimming just is a way of not just physical exercise, but for me it's like a mental, it's like meditation somehow, and it frees my mind from worry and frees my mind from fear or anxiety, and which we all have to do somehow. We all have to deal with our anxieties, and standing in front of the orchestra, you should be able to kind of forget all your worries and just be there for the music and for the orchestra. And swimming somehow just helps me with that. It's also about being in the water, that you hear different things.
Yes, that's so true.
The sounds become different, and it's well, I just love it.
Well, I'm wondering whether it'll be your answer to question 3, or whether that we might fit some skiing in later on when we come to the 10 questions. But we do need some way of a mental reset, or an emptying of the mind, especially after a tough rehearsal with maybe a tough piece, and we're concentrating hard on multi-time signatures. We need some way of emptying the mind.
Yes.
I always do my homework, as you know, because I showed you my little notebook, and which means that this morning I watched a video on your website, and I can't remember the exact phrase you used, but it was something along the lines of, you are a confirmed non-specialist, which I am as well. I will happily conduct, I'm next to me I'm trying to work out whether I can fit Shostakovich 8 and the Rachmaninoff Paganini Rhapsody together in a concert, and whether I need an opener. But actually, this morning I was also doing some arranging for an orchestra in Germany. Who the last time I worked with them, I was conducting German rap and hip hop. So I happily do everything from one to the other. It sounds like you do too, and like me, you just love music. Was it a conscious decision to? Because I know some agents who would love us to be specialists, whether it's early music, or you are a specialist in Russian repertoire, whatever it is. Or was it a conscious decision to go, no, actually, I like all music and I'll happily conduct it?
That's true. So I've always had the feeling that my world gets bigger and bigger all the time, and more interesting all the time, by doing more music from all ages. And I've always had the feeling that because when I started conducting, I was mainly doing new music. It was the new music that people wanted me to conduct, because I could beat the bars, and I could figure out the harmonies and the rhythms and the weird new things, and be like a policeman on a very busy traffic junction, and then make sure that everyone knows when to come in and wait. And I enjoyed it, but I very quickly realized that if I were doing lots of new music, this is what people would know me for. This is what I would be doing for the rest of my life. And then I I quickly started to do different kinds of music, like Bach and Mozart and Beethoven and Haydn, and then I moved on to the bigger symphonic repertoire, to do the Mahler and the Strauss, and I found that working on certain scores, I always have the feeling that what I'm doing is the best music ever. So last week we did Brahms' first piano concerto, and there is no better piano concerto than the Brahms first piano concerto when I'm doing it.
Yes.
But this week we're doing a Mozart piano concerto, and suddenly I feel, oh, hang on, there's nothing better than this Mozart piano concerto in the world. This is the best one ever. And that happens to me all the time when I work on a score, a good one, and I have a good connection with the orchestra, and we're having an interesting rehearsals. Then I always find, well, this is the music I should be doing all the time. And it's funny that you mentioned for managements that it is very difficult to sell someone who is not a specialist, because that's the way it works, is that people want, oh, we know that guy for that repertoire, so let's get him. So I'm making my manager's life tough by wanting to do that. And even thinking about the operatic or the well, my time in St. Gallen was, I did a Wagner, I did a Strauss, but I also did a Mozart. We did Risen on Skin by Benjamin.
Yes.
And I did a new opera written by a Swiss composer. So it was also that repertoire. I found that there's so much beauty to find in all those different scores. Why would I limit myself? I get to live this one life, right? And I'm not going to limit myself if I don't have to. I mean, this, yeah.
Absolutely, I completely agree. I really do. And what's interesting is about it, and I have a very similar attitude to you when I'm working on any piece, really, but that enthusiasm comes across. And I've had orchestral players talking to me. One in particular in the BBC Symphony Orchestra said, we love you coming because it's written all over your face how much you love what you're doing. Which, and that communicates, that's so important. I mean, there are times when we have to be an advocate for a piece of music that maybe doesn't touch us specifically or individually, but it doesn't mean that you can't still enjoy the process and the performance of it. But yeah, you're right. Every time I sit in front of a new program or stand in front of a new program, you think, oh, I can't wait to conduct this. This is great fun. Even if it's, German hip hop and rap or Shostakovich 8, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, it's great.
One final thing I mentioned earlier on, we were born in the same year, which means we're the wrong side of 50, or depending on how you look at it. And, you, as you said, your family's based, I think, in the Netherlands. Before that, you were based in Switzerland, but you're obviously in Vancouver a lot as the music director there. Any top tips for traveling for people of a certain age? I mean, does it take you long to get over it, or are you a sleeper, or what do you do to make sure that you always feel good on that first Monday morning?
Whenever I arrive after a flight, I go outdoors. I go for a walk. If possible, I go for a swim. So the first thing I always do going to a city, I remember I've just been to Perth in Australia, and the first thing I do, I have this app where I can find the best swimming pools around. So I find the best swimming pool around. So for me, having that physical exercise is really important. If I don't do that, I don't sleep well, and I can't function during the day. So that's essential. Not to be tempted to sit down on the couch and watch telly or Netflix when you arrive somewhere. Just be really active. That's really important. I try to eat very healthy, and that's something that it originates. My wife started doing that, and I thought, bullshit, why should I do that? I want to eat whatever I like. And then suddenly I realized that if you take care of what you eat, and if you figure out things that is good fuel for you, it makes a huge difference. So I think those two things are important. I mean, it's something that you just have to deal with. It's the flights are, it's never really easy, but
No.
yeah, it's part
We just get on with it. Now, I agree with you, especially about the eating, because I've been, or put it this way, eating far less than I used to, and I've lost an awful lot of weight over the last 3 months, and I feel so much better for it.
Yes.
You know, and I don't end the day of 5 or 6 hours rehearsing now. I don't end those days absolutely wiped out like I used to. I feel like I've still got energy to do some more. You know, and it makes such a difference. And you know, I've got a lot of flying in the new year. In 2023, and I'm looking forward to doing it a couple of stone lighter than I was, and seeing you know how I cope. So no, you're right.
Yeah. Especially the carbs. Quit your carbs. If you quit carbs, it's a huge difference.
Yeah, it is. I agree completely. I agree.
Yeah.
There's an 11th question, Otto, which you may or may not know about, which is basically about score preparation and score marking and learning. How do you go about it? Do you have a process that you always use, piano or non-piano or inner ear, you know, big to small, whatever? And for the geeks who've listened to all 120 odd episodes, are you a scribbler in? Are you a red, blue, and black pencil person, highlighters, or do you use nothing? Oh, wow. Now, Otto's showing me a pencil case of colours and rubbers and erasers and sharpeners.
So I'm a very much a scribbler, and it's I find that writing things. So I've tried to work with the iPad for a while, and I just, the thing is, when I work with a score on the iPad, it's very easy for traveling because you can bring the entire library for the next 5 years and it weighs nothing. But working on the iPad, it doesn't stick with me. I don't remember things that I've seen. When I have this pencil on the computer, you know, the iPad you can write on with a pencil. And even if I write things in my score, like harmonies or special dynamics or instrumentation remarks, then I forget them. And if I have a pencil, and I put it on paper, I remember. And then I don't have to look at it anymore, which is, for me, that it's very functional to write things down with a pencil. I love to start when I do a piece for the second or the third or the fourth time. I love to start with a clean score and a new pencil, just as a ritual. But very often there's no time to do that, and I just get my old score from somewhere. I'm very visual in a certain way, so I just showed you all those colored pencils, and I have this very simple way of grouping the instruments with the color. So for me, the strings are blue, and the brass is brown, and the woodwinds are purple, and the percussion is green, and so every instrument has a color. So whenever I see my scores, I see the color combination of instruments also in a real color combination.
Yes.
And that's just very helpful for me. Not only by you want to see in a glance, okay, so it's the clarinet who's coming up soon. It's also somehow but I think that's also what we do as a conductor, because if you listen to an orchestra play, you have to do so many things at the same time. You have to prepare the orchestra for what's coming. You have to listen to how are they playing, what's it sounding like, and do I want to change anything? So you're like almost at 3 moments in time at the same time with your mind. But I find that you very often you listen to the mixture of colors, the way the orchestra blends. And if there's something wrong in the blending, you start to try to figure out what do we need to work on. And the same thing happens with the colors in my scores. The colors kind of start to blend in a certain way. And I always recognize my own scores immediately when I go to the library of the Vancouver Symphony Orchestra, and there are things that I've done before that I've forgotten, because I forget all the time the things I've done. And I take out the score and I see my own pencil. Oh, I've done this one. That's me. So it's there's no question. when it's my score or not. I tend to write things in not to be able to see it afterwards, but once I've written them in, I know.
Yes. Yeah.
Actually, and then actually I don't need it anymore. But I need to have that moment of writing it in. That's yeah. It's also for me, when I prepare a score, I try to look at every single thing in the score. So I also have this system of going through all the instruments always, not missing one thing. And I mean, when you're traveling, there's no piano there. It's always very, very handy to have a piano there, but very often there is no piano. So you have to kind of start imagining those things in your mind. And it's always a challenge to hear different things at the same time in your head. I mean, that's always the big challenge. I mean, the easiest thing is just to go to Spotify and play 10 different recordings. But then it doesn't really stick with you. If you read a score, and I have this app on my watch that has a little vibrating metronome pulse. And so when I'm on the plane, I put on the metronome on my wrist.
Yeah.
And I'm reading score with a metronome running. And that's a good way for me to prepare scores.
Are you a young conductor, thirsty for knowledge and wanting to discover more about the conducting world? Then my Patreon page is there for you. I'm constantly posting new content there based on my experiences as a conductor, and I offer you the chance to ask me any question, any time of the day. You'll gain access to interviews, video posts, tour diaries, articles, and much more. If you pay for the whole year, then you will gain a 10% discount. And if you're a student, contact me directly and there will be a further discount. All of this can be found at patreon.com/a mic on the podium, and from just £5 a month, you gain access to this ever-growing resource on conductors and conducting. That's patreon.com. Details and links to the page are in the show notes attached to this episode. Now, the all-important 10 questions with my guest, Otto Tausk. Otto, it's 10 questions time. And so I start with, what sound or noise do you love and what sound or noise do you hate?
I love the sound of water in the ocean.
Yeah.
That makes me happy always and calm. What sound do I hate? Wow. I hate the sirens of the ambulance during the night when I'm trying to sleep.
That's a very good answer. I started to hate the sirens during lockdown when I was doing these interviews because it was very hot in the UK.
Yes.
And I had to have all of the windows shut. And I must have done at least 10 interviews sitting in this room, absolutely boiling because I didn't want to hear any ambulances coming through on the recording. Question 3. I wonder whether, due to your swimming, it's going to appear. I'm sure it will. But question 3 is, if you had 24 hours free, what would you spend it doing?
Swimming.
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 And after a good swim, are you an eater? Are you I know you.
Yes.
We're both trying to eat more healthily, but would you like to go out for a meal? And
yes, so I'm extremely happy whenever I'm in Vancouver, because you have the most great sushi places in the world in Vancouver, and there's even one place where I've been so often. They have now named a certain sushi kind after me. So you can actually get the Otto Tausk roll.
Oh, brilliant!
It's great. It's spicy tuna and it has some asparagus on it as well.
Yeah. Oh, that's excellent.
Yeah.
If I'm ever in Vancouver, I shall look it up because I do like sushi.
Yes.
That's brilliant.
Yes.
Question 4. Who would be a favourite conductor or conductors of yesteryear?
Bruno Walter.
Oh, now that's a name I'm not sure has appeared before. If it has, only once or twice. Why Bruno Walter?
Because I think his music making, as I know it from recordings, of course, because it's a long time ago, is incredibly sensitive and human, and has a kind of breath to it, and spacing that just really touches me very much.
Yeah, I think it's a great choice. I mean,
Yeah.
There's a is it Brahms 2? Watching him rehearse Brahms 2, where that's famous rehearsal when he's quite old. But yeah, his recordings are wonderful, and so very good choice, because I've not had it. And also, it's not Carlos Kleiber, which is good, because it's about time somebody didn't say that. So
Carlos Kleiber is, of course, very unique, and
but Bruno Walter's brilliant. I wonder whether your answer will be equally as brilliant, or whether it's the one I think it might be for question 5, which is, can you name your favorite current conductor or conductors?
So so being so close to Valery Gergiev for so many years has had the biggest impact on my life ever, especially my musical life, of course. The situation in the world being very tricky at this very moment, it's hard to put that in the right perspective. But I just feel that he is the biggest talent, and the most, he has the greatest instinct ever. But it's also hard to make a choice, because for some repertoire there are conductors that speak to me more than for other repertoire. But it's also, I can come back to certain recordings and then suddenly discover, but I actually really like what this person is doing. So it also changes. It really does. I mean, there was a time when I was 100% believer that the way Nikolaus Harnoncourt was doing the Beethoven symphonies was the only way possible. And then I suddenly heard the Swiss recordings of Zinman with his Beethoven symphony. I thought, oh no, my God, he's right. He's doing exactly what. And so it changes. Yeah.
Well, I think that's why some people have struggled or even refused to answer that question. But often the answers are repertoire specific, and as you rightly say, we change our minds, we grow, we grow older, our views change. I mean, it's going to, perfect. And I agree with you about Gergiev. Yes, whilst the situation now is far from ideal, but he was a great influence on your life then.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah. What is the hardest work you've ever conducted?
2 pieces come to mind. One is a piece by Boulez that I've done with an ensemble in Germany, the Musikfabrik. It was a while ago. It's called Derive, and it was a piece. I think it was a 20-minute piece to start with, and then just before we embarked on that journey, there was a second version, Derive 2, which was suddenly 45 minutes long, and it was the most difficult conducting ever. But I learned a great deal from that, and I there was some moments in the score that I had no idea how to tackle, and so he was in Amsterdam, and I brought the score to him, and I said, Maestro, I have this score, you wrote it, please tell me how to conduct this. And he said, I have no idea. So that kind of put me at ease. Now the other piece, I said there were 2 pieces. The other piece was actually a piece that we were accompanying a film. It was a piece by actually it was a really easy piece to conduct. It was a 4/4 tempo 60, but it had to last exactly an hour.
Yes.
So I was not allowed to speed up or slow down for an entire hour. And I refused to work with a click track for that piece. So I managed. I think I was perhaps half a minute off in the end or something. But and just the sheer concentration of staying in one tempo for an entire hour was really challenging. And I mean, it was not a difficult piece. I mean, everyone it was totally clear what everyone had to play. I just had to beat the bars and stay in that one tempo. And very but fun.
I'm not surprised you didn't want a click track, because having a tick every single second for an hour would drive you insane.
Crazy. Crazy. Crazy.
I've done a very similar thing, tacked on to I think it was at the end of a session of rehearsals with the BBC Symphony Orchestra. They wanted us to record a new signature tune for the Proms, which they did eventually use. And I was told, I can't remember what the final, it had to be something like 31 seconds long.
Right.
You know, and so, you know, the music was handed out and we read it through, and then we put the red light on and we did it, and they said, no, I'm sorry. It was perfect in every way other than it was 32 seconds long.
Right.
Could you do it again, please? You know, and with no click track, nothing, you know, so you're just guessing.
Yes.
And we got it exactly 31 minutes long, and but on that take, the trumpets split the last note, so we couldn't use it. And then took another 2 or 3 goes to do it. I mean, yeah, they're some of the weird and wonderful things we end up doing. But yeah, the thought of an hour of 4/4 with a click in your head, forget it.
Oh yeah, crazy. Yeah.
When traveling abroad to conduct, what item could you not leave home without?
Swimming trunks, definitely swimming trunks. If I whenever I travel, the first thing I do is I figure out where is the swimming pool and I go there.
Yeah. Did you know, by the way, that Vasily Petrenko was nearly became an Olympic swimmer?
Really?
Yeah. It's one of the things I found out interviewing him.
Oh, yeah. Right. I could also have said my knitting needles, because sometimes I knit blankets. Especially when I was living in Switzerland and I was spending all these evenings at home and the snow was falling, and I knitted blankets. I'm a terrible knitter. I can only do one way, but I find it very calming.
Yeah. Brilliant.
Yeah.
Number 8, anything you like, real, fantasy, whatever. What is the one thing you would change about being a conductor?
Ooh. So I have actually recently changed one thing I wanted to change for a very long time. So I might just talk about that. It's the shoes. The shoes. So I'm a huge barefoot walker, which is like the special barefoot shoes. You feel the ground. They're very flexible, and so my rehearsals are always on. You know, it's what's the English word? The plimsoll or a barefoot shoe. It's very comfortable. And I feel that I can stand comfortable, and then the concert comes and you have to wear these shiny shoes that are very uncomfortable. So I have a friend of mine has just made me barefoot concert shoes, and they're it's so fantastic to really stand on the ground and feel comfortable with your shoes.
Yeah. That's a brilliant answer. Not one I expected at all, but what a great answer. And you're so right in the fact that, you know, most people will be wearing during the day a pair of trainers or sneakers, as they're called in the US, or, you know, a shoe that you've had for years, a leather shoe possibly, that's really comfortable. And then you put on your shiny shoes for the concert and you get in them and think, well, I only ever wear these for concerts. They're as stiff as a board.
Exactly.
Absolutely brilliant answer.
Yeah.
Number 9, and again, real or fantasy, completely up to you. Number 9 is, what profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
Something outdoors, probably.
Yeah.
Be a shepherd or something.
A lot of alone time, I would, being a shepherd. But yeah, something outdoors makes sense for you, I think.
Something outdoors, yes, I think so. I love languages. I would love to learn more languages. I wish I had the time to learn better Italian or French or Spanish or and it just never I never find the time to do that. That would be something I would love to go into depth in. Yeah.
Going into depth, cheesy link, but going into depth made me suddenly think, somebody who obviously absolutely adores swimming and has wetsuits and swimming trunks and whatever else. Have you ever scuba dived? Is that something that you're also interested in?
No, I have not. Not. No, but I'm tempted though. I had a very nice dinner last night with Paul Nicklin and his wife Christina Mittermeier, which probably two people you don't know. But if you start Googling Paul Nicklin and Christina Mittermeier, you'll find out what they do. And what they do is they go to Antarctica and they film underwater stuff, and it's so beautiful. It's amazing. I was like, why haven't I seen this before? And they live here on Vancouver Island, and the most nature place you can imagine.
Yeah.
And this morning I was thinking, I might want to try scuba diving once. Yeah.
Well, the reason why I thought about it was that, you know, if there, I couldn't think of any jobs other than being a swimming instructor until I thought, oh, frogman, you could be a frogman if you scuba dived.
A frogman, yeah. I would be terribly scared of sharks, though.
Yes.
This is something I'm scared of. Sharks is I remember last year I had this wonderful. So during COVID, I did travel to Canada, and I had to spend 2 weeks quarantine. So now I hope the authorities are not listening to your podcast, but I did do my quarantine, but I was by the ocean and I did go swimming. Probably they can't find me in hindsight, but I wasn't allowed, of course. But I did go swimming, and I went in with a wetsuit. And I came out, and the neighbors said, "Oh, I see you had a nice swim. Did you see the killer whales go by?"
And hopefully you said, no, I didn't, thank God.
I didn't, thank you. And and because the thing about killer whales is that they don't attack people, but they eat sea lions. And when you have a wetsuit on, you look very much like a sea lion.
yeah. Oh my God! Wow, that's amazing. I think I'd love to watch them go by from the safety of the shore, but being definitely not.
Yeah.
And finally, Otto, it's time to ask you my favourite question. If the world were to end tonight, what would be your choice of final meal and drink?
Without any doubt, it would be sushi. Mm-hmm. I just adore the Japanese cuisine, and I would drink a white wine with it.
Any particular country, vineyard?
Italian white wine.
Nice. And crisp and cold?
Crisp and cold, yes.
That sounds lovely. Oh, I do like sushi as well. It's one of the benefits of my new eating regime is that it's stuff that you can eat and it's not too bad for you.
Absolutely. I leave out the rice is my advice.
Yeah. Great answer. And a great interview it's been. I've thoroughly enjoyed chatting to you, Otto. And I hope that, we can sit down one day over some sushi and a glass of white wine and carry on chatting again. Thank you very much.
I would love that. Thank you so much. It's been great talking to you. Thank you so much.
A Mic on the Podium was devised and produced by Michael Seal, with music by Ben Dawson. Next time, I chat with a British conductor who started his musical career as a chorister and went on to become a countertenor, singing in choirs and also on the opera stage. His conducting career really started in earnest in 2001 when he founded Tenebrae and the Tenebrae Consort. But until then, bye-bye.